Airing on Asheville FM 103.3 LPFM in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian broadcasts and podcast emanating out of occupied Chalagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world, and you can find our archives, transcripts, ways to follow us and support us at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org. Here's the chat I just had with four radicals living in France. Rather than introduce them, I'll let them do that themselves. So we talk about the recent protests and riots in France concerning reforms to the pension system that would push back the age of retirement and increase the amount of years that someone has to work in order to get a retirement, as well as the legal manipulation of Macron's neoliberal government to get it passed, the composition of the demos, the recent ecological demonstrations violently repressed in Sainte-Soline, police violence more widely, and other topics. This conversation is a bit informal, and though we cover a lot, there is very much more to talk about. There's actually a lot of questions that I had sent that we didn't get a chance to touch on. But for folks who want to learn more, I suggest checking out recent articles on the protests by crimethinc, which I'll link to in the show notes.
Hey, I'm French. I'm 35, lived abroad for a long time, and I just came back to France in January, right before the reform was announced, and I've been participating in the movement since.
I'm Garrick, I'm 24, I'm French student, and pronounce he, him, and I'm currently in Paris, been studying here for, 4 or 5 years. I don't even remember. I'm not originally from Paris, but I'm basically French.
Hi, I'm Giuseppe. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm Italian, but I normally live in New York, and I'm here in Paris for a few months studying as well.
And my name's David Campbell. I'm 35. I'm American, and I've been living in France, in Paris, for about a year and a half.
And listeners may be familiar with David. We had a chat a couple of years ago about supporting anti-fascist prisoners and about David's experience. So thanks for coming on, all of you, and thanks for returning, David.
Yeah, good to be here.
So I was hoping to have you all on to talk about some of these massive protests that I've been seeing articles about and little bits of amazing inflammatory videos on social media. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about these demonstrations that have been going on for the last 3 months, sort of what they're in response to in terms of the, here's my embarrassing part, réforme des retraites.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We got a lot of silent E's on the ends of words in French. It's if you studied Spanish, it's kind of a red herring.
Yeah, it's kind of like a poke in the eye, just boop.
Yeah.
Can you talk about these reforms and who it impacts and how?
For me, the one thing that's important is it's not the first reform of the retirement system. I think there's been 8 reforms in the past 30 years. And I think in the 80s, there was a reform that made it that people could retire at age 60, and it was 65 before that. And then after that, it just kept going up. And so since 2010, the legal age that you can retire in France was 62. And the current reform wants to make it 64 years old. And that's after working 43 years. So if you want a full retirement, you need to be 64 years old and you need to have worked for 43 years, which affects all workers, but it really has deeper issues for some workers. For example, women who tend to have interrupted careers and usually already go on retirement about a year later than men because of that. So it really impacts them, and it impacts people who are job physically. There's a lot of jobs where it's hard to imagine that you're going to be able to do that job until 64 years old. And there's the typical liberal response that's like, well, people can change careers and, you don't have to keep the same job your whole life. But some people do want to keep their job their whole life. And actually, a lot of French workers, we still think of their career as one job that they keep. So for me, those are going to be people that are going to be affected the most by the reform.
So it follows a series of reforms that took place in the past and always in this objective to push back the legal age of retirement. And the press and everybody focused on that point, but what is even trickier is that the legal age would pass from 62 to 64, but to have a complete pension, to not have a reduced pension, it's not based on the legal age of retirement, but on the
number of years you worked, right?
Exactly,
Yeah,
and contributed to the system.
Yeah. Everyone I know does like 4 different things. I don't know about you.
Exactly. Exactly. So,
if I can add something, I like the emphasis on the trajectory and the fact that this is not a new thing. This is a long process that has been going on for decades, really, of like trying to go in this direction of pushing the age of retirement. And before we recorded, we were chatting about Italy, but there's other countries in Europe too, and there's a tendency in the whole European continent at pushing. I was reading the other day actually that they may start discussing measures to make a uniform rule, and the number that they were looking at was 67, which is what it is in Italy right now. Italy and France are similar. Italy is the cost of the pensions I was reading is 16% of the GDP. In France, it's 14%, and they have a similar trajectory also demographically, which is what people like Macron will say is like the people are aging. This is an expensive welfare measure, and we have to, someone has to pay for it, and it's going to have to be the workers. And I think what's interesting in looking at it from the point of view of like this a long trajectory is that it's not a new problem. We know that life is changing, that the conditions of workers are not the same as they were before, that life is getting longer, and so it's always remarkable for me that the answer is always the same. So it's always to put more weight, more work really on the shoulders of worker. And this is why I like, for example, one of the slogans of the protesters, which is, the age now was 62, is going to be pushed to 64 by 2030. But they're saying, no, let's bring it back to 60.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the point, because it's not just about, reducing damage and keeping it where it is trying to say we need to figure out a completely new way. This trajectory in which we've been on is clearly not serving us, because, if we go on like this, then next year we're going to have to, go to 67 and then to 70 and whatever, and we're going to die as we work, So, thank you for putting the emphasis on that, because I think it's really the crucial issue. Yeah. And he points to the fact that really, in looking at this reform, actually we have to rethink the whole system, really. And accept, yes, that conditions are changing, and so we should radically rethink the way that things are done.
Yeah, I love the pushback. It kind of touches on a lot of questions about the future of work more generally. This sort of idea of universal basic income and stuff like that. How do you take care of people if AI takes a third of people's jobs or whatever? These questions are kind of waiting in the wings, but I think that's all there for a lot of people. It's all related to pension reform, all that's what the trajectory of people's work lives is going to look like in the coming decades. I love that I've seen a lot of talk about how working class folks, I think a quarter of impoverished workers in France die before 64. Have you seen that? 64 c'est mort. You see a lot of 64 years old. It's dead. It's dead as a way to say it sucks, but also, referring to the fact that a lot of people will be dead by that age. So they will, literally be working to death. That's the thing I've seen a lot. Is people, the working poor, a quarter of them will be dead by that age.
And also in some jobs, the conditions are so difficult that by age 60, you already have a big amount of them that are on sick leave and are ending their career on sick leave. For example, nurses, they say about a third of nurses are on sick leave by the time they reach their retirement. So really, we're going to give them 2 years more when already they cannot make it until 62.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up.
And I might add some things. I know I said it will impact everybody, but we are not talking about two categories of people who are not impacted by this reform and still have a lot of things to say is people who are already retirees. So they
Very true. Yeah.
I mean,
they're like not happy about it either.
yeah.
Yeah.
So first, and then also the people who have the money to have private pensions and private ways to still get money when they retire, and that's not everybody, and especially not in France where we have this system redistribution system. Is that it? Yeah, and I think that's really dangerous, the trajectory you just described, because it pushes people to find other ways that the public way to have a pension when they retire. But the thing is, it will create more and more inequalities.
That's a really good point, I think, and it really is what the Macron wants, and like what those liberals, what they want is that they want people to divest from the public pension system and invest into their own private retirement, similar to what's happening in the US. So maybe for an American audience, they may think this is normal. I mean, when I was contributing to my retirement in the US, and it was private funds through my employer, not in France. In France, it's very much a public system based on redistribution. And like you said, that not everyone is able to do that. And it really, a lot of people are even thinking like they're doing it on purpose so that people divest from the public system to go to a private system. And then little by little, it will become the norm. So that is also what people are fighting against.
For me, when I've talked to folks in the US about this, a lot of times people balk, like, people retire at 62. That's crazy. Do you mean they have the end of their life to maybe have some health and live out?
Yeah, but like the U.S. is not the standard for like living a long, healthy life free of gun violence or anything like it.
American people are proud to work 70 hours a week and to work until they die. French people are not like that. We like our free time. We like having a nice little apéro with friends.
Is there like a different name for Stockholm syndrome when it affects a whole society?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's a very good question.
But American dream.
Yeah.
American dream.
Hardcore American dream. Yeah. So I mean, I don't mean to cut you off, but that is the thing that I think about a lot, because I have an American live over here and talk to my parents about the pension reform protests and stuff, and I get that a lot. And it's like my mom, who's 65 and still working, she could retire, but she's like, oh, I don't know what I would do. It's like, oh, come on, French people, it's only 2 more years. And I'm like, but Mom, it's kind of not the point, first of all. And like, I mean, it's partly the point, but it's not really all of it. And then, who wants to work longer? Like, when there is money that is just in the wrong hands and is not being distributed properly, so I think I've also talked to a lot of people at protests and stuff who take a very, like, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Well, obviously they don't say that because it's the metric system, but they take that sort of attitude to it, where it's like, you have to fight tooth and nail against all these attempts to carve away at what we do have, So.
Yeah, and not to make this interview about the American perspective and and explain to Americans, but because that's where the majority of our audience is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think that, like, David, you brought up to, like, well, we're losing jobs to AI and automation, and there's this there's two things. The, like, why can't they just work harder? What's wrong with them? They're lazy. Has, like, the counterpoint to that is obviously, like, why are we being forced to work so hard for such shit wages? But also, if we're able to automate portions and decrease the cost of production for various things that help society run, why is there the presumption that the benefit of that just gets redistributed into the hands of the people that already have the money, that own the companies, as opposed to towards the wider social betterment of society? That, hey, everybody, guess what? We get to go home early.
Yeah. That's kind of, that's the stuff that comes to mind for me, and I'm like, I guess I'm interested in what the future is going to bring. Just on a personal level, it's something that I think is like really exciting, and, you know, really terrifying at the same time. But, you know, that sort of stuff comes to mind. It's like, well, so you're saying it's going to be easier to get more stuff done, but we'll have to work longer and you'll take more of it. That doesn't really sound ideal.
There was an interview that went quite, not viral is not the right term in this connection, but like, I think it was right after the use of the 49.3. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But Macron gave this interview to two journalists on TV, and the way that he was talking about this, kind of relating to what Verse was saying, he was saying, look, do you think I want to do this reform? I don't want to do this reform, but we have to.
Yeah.
So that's the idea, I think, as you were saying, of like, the conditions of work are changing. We actually need less work to make things happen. Turns out we still have to work more. But then there is an effort in saying stuff like, look, I don't want to do this, but we have to make it look like, because of, heteronomous conditions, like the fact that people are living longer, that this is the only way, that there's no other way. That, of course, Macron too, like, he hates doing this.
Yeah, dude, ask your friends. Like, they have the money. Like, if you don't want to do it, ask your friends.
As you were saying, in fact, it's much more credible, rather, that there is a plan to actually change things and to make the private more prominent in things like pensions or health. But always that attempt at making it look like there's only one way possible,
And my hands are tied.
Yes.
Yeah.
He said really often that it was unavoidable, that it was necessary, because there was just no other option. But there actually are a lot of other options. The main one being tax the rich, but that's, my own,
Tax and then eat.
preferred one. But one of your questions was about the other options, and there are other options. So there's this big idea that it's unavoidable, but when you actually look into all of the reports about the future of the pension system in France, it shows that it's pretty stable. It has more than enough money for this year and for last year. The next few years, it's going to be a slight deficit. And then that's where they diverge. So Macron says by 2030, there'll be a huge deficit. And then other people are reading the same report and they're saying, actually, no, by 2030, it should even out. It should be working out. So there is really this incomprehension in French people right now, which is why are they trying so hard to push this reform based on one way of reading a report when there are tens of other ways of reading that same report and saying that the system is fine. And so that is, I think, one of the main reasons why French people really reacted to that reform is why? They really, we don't understand, in the middle of the context of inflation that is, it's really, I know in the US as well, but inflation here, everyone is saying it, right? Like we know, everyone goes to the supermarket and is paying so much more money. I know people who are not turning the heat on, reducing their water usage. And I'm talking like middle class people, like everyone, not just already poor working class. It's everyone is really feeling this inflation. And then on top of that, you're going to put the reform. And so everyone is just like, why? Oh yeah, because they live in their castle up there and they just have no idea what we're going through. And so I really feel like this is feeding a lot of the anger right now, is this disconnect between those really rich Parisians in their castle and the rest of the population.
The fake strategy of necessary evil. Behind it, there's also the fact that the government and Macron, but his ministers as well, hid the fact that economically speaking, it's not perfect reform. Like pushing back 2 years means that there's going to be more people on sick leave, you said it.
Or unemployed.
Or unemployed. So it means more.
I guess there's going to be more like money paid out for people on unemployment and like health, sick leave and stuff like that. Just like a stupid job.
Yeah, exactly.
No, yes,
so
absolutely.
I
You're right.
don't receive the economic advantage.
It doesn't make sense. You're going to have more people on sick leave, more people who are unemployed, and so we're going to give them money that we're taking so that they can work longer. It just doesn't add up.
I mean, honestly, like, so Macron is, especially maybe for people in the States that don't follow French politics that closely, Macron is like a center-right guy who was a banker and became the finance minister, I believe, and then just catapulted to the presidency because the other option was Marine Le Pen, who's far-right xenophobe, her family's been trying to get the presidency for like 40 years or something, you know. And Macron, but he's a banker at heart, and I think that he's done a really good job of trying to cover that up and be like, I'm the nice guy, you know, we're all in this together, you know, big tent, sort of like we're keeping things on course. I don't want to do this, you know, like that, all that, it's kind of tied together. I think I don't know if he always believed that or he's just starting to believe that, but like he gave this interview that was really bad a week or two ago, and he was like completely out of touch about the pension reform. He's like, I was elected on this platform, like people voted for me because they liked my program. It's like, dude, people voted for you because they don't like Marine Le Pen. It's like, so I think all that stuff is also in the air. People talk about that a lot. I think French Wall Street guy, you know.
It's a really good point to bring that he was not elected for his program. He was elected so that Marine Le Pen would not be elected. Except that now he's saying, well, the retirement age going up was part of my program, and you elected me based on my program. So that means I can do it. And it's like, no.
Dude, the other guy's program was no more Muslims.
Yeah.
Like, so it's not okay. Yeah.
So I think there was a mention of, well, besides the protests in the streets, has been a mention of at least the legislative pushback. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like some of the organized responses to these reforms from labor unions and also maybe from oppositional parties too, or other ministers, and like how it actually got pushed through. Because that I think also inflamed even more people when they realized like, oh, this is even less democratic than we thought it was.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. The reform was announced on January 10th, and almost immediately there was a big union response to it, which surprised me. I mean, I've been away from France for a long time, but one of the main things that happened while I was away was the Gilets jaunes, which was completely organic, completely out of labor unions. Labor unions seem to have really fallen out of favor. And then all of a sudden, I go to this march because my mom is old school and she said, let's go to the march. So I go to the march. The Union March. Yeah. I go to the Union March with my mom thinking there's going to be 10 old people and that's going to be it. And there were really a lot of people. And so, and it was cold that day, I remember. But anyway, so lots of people, the unions were just really motivated, and the next march was even more people, and the next march is even more people. And I'm in Marseille, which is a very militant city, but then I'm hearing even in Paris it's happening. And one thing that really surprised me was how calm those were compared to a lot of marches in the previous 10 years where there was a lot of, black blocs and riots and breaking banks or whatever. Those were really organized by the unions, you could tell, which, I'm really not like saying what's my favorite, like it was very different from what I was expecting. And then that lasted until the end of March. And then at the end of March, the law was supposed to pass. And so there had to be a vote in parliament. And Macron felt that he was not going to get the majority. And so he used a legislative tool that's called the 49.3, because it's Article 49.3, which was designed to prevent the assembly from being completely immobilized. What can happen sometimes, for example, I think in Italy you have that issue sometimes, or I know in Belgium, where like things are just blocked because there isn't...
Sorry, I just don't, not quite...
Like a tiebreaker.
Oh!
Yes.
It's like more than a tiebreaker. I think in the US you have the thing called the filibuster.
Yes.
When like the conversations in the Congress like go on and on and on and on. So the 49.3 is thought to avoid that. So if there's
Yeah.
an obstructionism is what they call
Yeah.
it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
What-
At least to my understanding, it's more like an executive order. So the
All
president has the right in the U.S. to say like, okay, now I guess like during COVID we saw like, you have to be, I don't know, whatever. I can't think of an example of an executive action, but the president has some limited power to say, you have to do this now, and then we don't know how long it'll last. Maybe it'll go to the courts and they'll shoot it down, but like, you can kind of like implement this thing off the cuff without the legislature. 49.3 to my mind is kind of like that. But it's written in I guess it's the Constitution. I guess it's
I
Article
think it's part of the Constitution.
49.3 of the Constitution. Yeah.
Yes, but what's new and very dangerous, it's not only the 49.3. It's like they use a series of articles that are written to help the government govern and take measures and help the legislative process.
Yeah, totally.
And the thing is, they used 4 articles. There's 47.1, 14. I don't know.
I hadn't heard that.
But like so it's not only like they reduced the time MPs had to discuss the thing, and they reduced the possibility to object. They reduced the time. The conditions were just impossible for the opposition to have a valid and concrete response to that. And it's this week the Constitutional Council is supposed to examine the law and in the process itself to see if it was unconstitutional or constitutional. The fact that they used 4 articles that have not been made to be used simultaneously.
Right.
And I think it's a very, very dangerous message they send for the future governments that you can do that and not have any opposition at all. And I'm worried about the extreme right wing itself, especially. But
I think I heard that the 49.3 was used 11 times since Macron became president.
And before that, like not at all.
I had
rarely.
never heard of 49.3, and then the other day I was in the countryside, deep in the countryside, in Bourgogne, and every comment on dit un panneau? Every sign someone had tagged on it 49.3, 49.3. So you
like
go
the street signs.
like
the
on
road
the road signs. I was going from the station to where I was going, full half hour. Every sign has been tagged 49.3, 49.3. And this is something we had never even heard of before. And so that's just showing you how much it's been used and how that really crystallized a lot of the anger.
Totally.
And one thing that I can say, before I was saying I went to those demonstrations and they were so calm and I was surprised. After the 49.3 was used, that changed. So I wasn't in Paris, so I can't talk for Paris, but in Marseille, what I noticed was way younger people. A lot of the high school kids were there. A lot of university people were there. And I noticed some stuff burning, which was not the case before. I was with my elderly mom, so, I didn't go and check things from too close, but there was definitely like fires in the background and, stuff burning. I think there was a black bloc, which, and then in Paris, I don't know if some of you can talk about how it's been in Paris, but what I saw in the news was it became really different after the 49.3 was used.
I think it's right. Tone changed after 49.3.
Completely changed.
I haven't been out to all the protests. I'm also keeping a distance from like the really hot stuff because, I don't need any more trouble in my life. But like, there's definitely, I also don't have the context that like you guys have because you're French. I haven't been here for that long. You guys grew up here, but like the union, there are big like union-sponsored protests that are legal, permitted, announced in advance, in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And you have the unions with like big box trucks with like speakers blasting songs and people dancing. and like giant inflatable things strapped to the top and banners and matching like outfits. And I mean, and it's hundreds of thousands of people. Like it's massive. And that was what I started going out to. And there's people of all ages, you know, just to check it out and see what's going on. And then after 49.3, I feel like I started seeing a lot more, like you would go to that. And then after a few hours, like as it got close to sort of its destination, maybe shit would start getting smashed, set on fire. You would see more younger people in Black Bloc kind of mingling with the crowd. And
which honestly, that is closer to the way demonstrations used to be.
I believe that. Yeah.
Demonstrations really used to be, like in the past 15 years,
yeah.
Big union demonstration, cortège de tête, which is the Black Bloc in front, and they're just like...
Which is amazing for me as an American. You guys have like big, legit, permitted union-backed demonstrations, and they're like, yeah, let's get a Black Bloc in the front.
No, the unions...
It's like incredible.
Yeah, but the unions hate the Black Bloc.
I bet they do, but also...
But not this time, and so that's
right,
like the thing that if we start talking a bit more like riot porn, then, you know, hearing stories, and people have told me that it's really much like next level, you know, so it's very different. But so, yeah, what we used to have was those really organized union demonstration with the Black Bloc in front, and they're fucking shit up. The union is not happy at them. Sometimes they fight, and then it's over. And what we saw this time was big union protests, very calm. And then 49.3 is being used end of March, and then it's not even part of the protest. It's in the evening, people meet and they have what we call une manif sauvage.
Manif sauvage. Wild protest.
Wild protest.
Spontaneous protest.
And they just burn fucking everything.
Smash shit. They block the streets. Like,
they block the streets.
Seen
they
a lot of
tag
trash. Because there's been a garbage collector strike. That's over now, but I think it's supposed to pick back up again in a week. But there was a lot of trash on the street for a long time. And these manif sauvage, you would see a lot of people throwing trash cans, bags of trash and stuff that was piled up on the street in the middle of the road, along with like rental bikes. And if there's construction equipment nearby, like drag all that out in the street and block the flow of traffic, set stuff on fire.
I've heard of the usual cortège de tête happening and the union clapping them, which is something I had never heard of. The union usually beat the shit out of them, like they fight, you know. This time, someone told me the union was like clapping at them, being like, "Yeah, guys, like go and destroy everything."
Yeah, people really don't feel that. Like, even if you have stock, even if you have faith in the quote unquote like democratic system, right? It's like that clearly hasn't been respected.
No,
and even if you're just looking at 49.3, I actually didn't know what you were talking about, Gaby, about the other articles that were kind of like piled on to make it this like really finesse the process. I didn't even know about that. But so like even the people who have some faith in the electoral system as it exists, it's like that's clearly just being flouted. You hear a chant at the protests a lot, nous aussi on va passer en force. And if I'm understanding that right, it's a reference to Macron just forcing it through. That means like we too are going to force ourselves through, like force our way through, right? So, you know, we too are going to just make it happen. We're just going to ram it through. And it's referring to the way that Macron just kind of rammed it through, you know.
I think something else that won the unions over was the police response.
Also.
That. Yeah. I've talked to people who have been in those kind of demonstrations for years, and they said this is the most violent response they've seen ever. I mean, we can talk about Sainte-Soline at some point as well, but I know people who have PTSD from Sainte-Soline. Like, I know people who have seen someone lose an eye in front of them. People who became deaf for a little bit because of what happened there. Like, it's been absolutely insane, the police response.
Could you say a few things about like specifically what that escalation in violence from the police looks like? Because like speaking from personal experience, the only big demonstration I've ever been to was I went to May Day in 2018 in Paris, and I was like, this tear gas is worse than stuff in the US. And there was so many flashbangs, and there was so much violence, and there was the cortège de tête. But like like, is the response that you're seeing now reflective of the police response during Gilets jaunes, but it's being seen by more people because the unions are drawing more people into the streets simultaneously, or what does that escalation in violence look like?
I can only talk in hearsay because I'm a good girl and I stay out of trouble. But
I've been to two marches, and what I can say is that we talked about the black blocs, which are the very specific way to demonstrate and to oppose a measure in a very specific mode of action. But the thing is, I've been shocked by the way police were charging. Charging everyone.
Yeah.
We have grandpas and grandmas and little children because it's a big crowd.
It's kind of crazy.
Like you said, it's a general opposition. So like global massive opposition. So we have every part of the population represented in it. And the police just being asked to charge and to I don't know, scare people off or just beat them down. I just don't get it because the last march I went to, I think it was in March.
Was it here in Paris?
It was Place de l'Opéra. So the rival point of the demonstration was in Place de l'Opéra, and I mean they blocked every exit.
Yes.
So we were like turning in around and around, and like just don't know what to do, and so to start the heat off, it's perfect, and there was like I don't know, maybe for hundreds of people just don't knowing what to do. There were maybe 3 or 4 people starting fires and shit, and I was like, they if I see them, why does the police not see them starting fires and stuff? And go and arrest them. If they're the people who caused the problems, then just they asked but it was a free. I don't know. They just let people panic and going around for I don't know, maybe half an hour, and then they let people out, but it was too late because it was already firing up, and so I'm very confused about what are the orders and what is the strategy here. And I'm not even talking about the use of LBDs and tear gas and very, very dangerous stuff.
Like the grenade de Saint-Soline. The grenade de Saint-Soline.
Yeah, exactly.
The sting balls. We call it sting balls. The LBDs, the LBD, people don't know, it's like the big, really big fat rubber bullet that a lot of people have lost eyes to those. I think those came out in Gilets jaunes. I don't know if that's when they first made an appearance, but I know that like I've seen a lot of stuff in like just around about people losing eyes to LBDs during Gilets jaunes. But they're really big. I mean maybe 2 inches in diameter, like a Gilets jaunes. Loi de travail. So let's talk about that actually, because
I can't tell much about Loi de travail because I wasn't in France, but every one of my people I know who have told me about demonstrations have said that it's become much more violent after the Loi Travail, which I think was in
2016, I think it was 2016.
Was it 2016?
I think. Okay. That's my answer. So I've been trying to look this up because I didn't grow up here and I've been here for only a year and a half. Like I said, Loi Travail, the work law reform, I don't actually know what the crux of that issue was.
Wasn't it about like extending backwards the valid work age of youth?
No, what you're saying it kind of makes me think of CPE, which was in 2005, but I don't know. Yeah, after 2005, I'm not too sure because I wasn't in France anymore. But in 2005, there was CPE, which was huge demonstrations. And I went to those, and they were like Manif Sauvage, and there were like big unions, and there were massive amount of people. And I got tear gassed a bunch, but it wasn't anything too crazy. And then my friends really told me while I was away from France, like,
no big deal, I get tear gassed a bunch.
It's France! You get tear gassed by the cops.
That's true, they're fucking crazy with that tear gas.
They're insane, they love it.
They're insane with that shit.
But all of my friends told me in 2016, that's when it became really crazy.
So that's what I've heard, and
That's what I've heard.
And so if we trace back the police response to big protests over the past, I guess that's 7 years ago, 8 years ago now, loi du travail, work law stuff in 2016, to my understanding, is when you first started seeing massive amounts of riot cops flooding the street and having this overwhelming numbers based response to people in the street.
And those sting things.
Sting balls, yes.
Sting balls.
And the Brabham as well.
Brabham came about in
Yeah.
Gilets jaunes. So
Brabham
Brabham is from, there's this like elites, like motorized riot cop squad called
It's not even a squad.
they're just a bunch of losers on motorcycles,
Yeah.
but they're a bunch of riot cops on motorcycles. And I guess somebody in the fucking, drawing room at the cop headquarters figured out that a motorcycle helmet is basically a riot cop helmet, and was like, well, they don't need to take their helmets off. They can just sit on motorcycles and cruise around and show up, and they can be this sort of lightning response to Manif Sauvage and things like that. So BABM is Brigade de Répression à Actes Violents.
Violent, mobilisé. So
It's like the mobilized.
it's like
There's a couple of things that their name is an acronym for the Mobile Brigade for the Repression of Violent Acts, which is funny because they're extremely violent. And then it sounds like the word for brave in French, Bois. So it's a couple of things at the same time, and everybody hates them. And they came around in Gilets jaunes. They were created during Gilets jaunes because that was such a, to my understanding, wasn't here for it, but a very spontaneous sort of like wildcat, movement that was popping up everywhere, and there was a lot of property destruction and stuff.
But the Brabham, it means something. It reminds people of cops that were called les voltigeurs.
What is that?
Les voltigeurs were cops. Yes.
The bikes, yeah.
And
in the 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
they were made. So there was this. I'm gonna research the year because I'm not sure. So I'm sorry. There was actually a Netflix show about it.
About cops hitting people
No,
on
about
bikes.
Malik Ousekine.
Are they like chips in the U.S.? There was like a bad show in the 1980s about motorcycle cops in California. Was it just okay?
Until 1986, there were cops on motorbikes that would come during riots, and then this guy called Malik Ousekine was killed by one of them. So there would be two people on a bike, and one is driving, and the other one is hitting people. So it killed someone, and then it became forbidden. The Brave M is literally that. So for French people, it really means something. It's like, here's something that you made illegal in 1986, and now you're making it legal again, except you're just like, it doesn't really have a real existence. It's literally whatever riot cop is available at that time and whatever motorbike is available at that time, we're going to put them on it, and they're going to go and hit people. You're giving them a different name, and you're not making it a unit, but it's literally that thing that you banned 30 years ago.
And I think Darmanin, who's this man who's been targeted a lot in the
Interior Ministry?
it's the Minister of Interior, and he's been targeted a lot by the
Because he's a rapist.
He's also a rapist.
Yeah.
in the protests, and he's this kind of figure that isn't afraid to say the most vile things.
Yes.
On TV and interviews and stuff. And I don't remember if it was actually him or another, of his men, but when they were confronted exactly about this, the voltigeur and this, I think 22-year-old person was killed in the 80s, and they were being confronted about why would you bring back that body of police that did that, and he was like, no, it's completely different. That's a completely wrong comparison, because they cannot hit from the bike. They get off the bike and then
yes.
And then they hit people.
They're supposed to get off the bike, but they can't. We have so many videos on social media that shows that they do not get off the bike.
And to give you an idea, when I first arrived to Paris, I wasn't aware of the Brave having been reinstated, let's say, after Gilets jaunes. And one day I was just walking down the streets at night, and as you were explaining, these Manif Sauvage just kind of happen, so you don't know where they are or where the police is going to be. And the police presence in the city is insane. It looks like a war zone, really. You walk around and you don't feel safe. There's a classic thing, when you see that many cops, you're like, okay, I'm going to get hurt at some point. And then you see the Brave come, and it was the first time that I saw them, and it was, to me, it was insane, because this was maybe 40 bikes, big bikes, with 2 cops, and cops in France are fucking huge as well, I don't know why, and with these helmets, so their faces are like completely like covered, and it just didn't feel like being in a democratic country or anything, because like you see them sprint through the streets, like 40 bikes with 2 cops each, so that's 80 policemen with their like batons and like whatever other weapons they're carrying.
Shields,
And this is not like, it's not an area that has been like secluded for the money, for anything. You are just walking on the street, and then there's 80 armed men on motorbikes. It just doesn't feel like they're protecting anyone's safety, of course. They're just like, serving a specific purpose, which is making stuff more violent, really.
And there was a lot of reports where it was just random people that were passing on the street being like, oh yeah, I spent a whole day in jail. They beat me up. They arrested me. And then in the evening, when I said, can I please get some paper, some proof that I was there? They said, no, you're just out. And those are the kind of stories that you're hearing from just random people walking on the streets.
I mean, we all heard of the story of 2 Austrian high school students who were just taken to a police station because they were walking by a wild demonstration, and they were just taken by the grab and taken. Yeah,
Austrian or Australian?
Austrian.
Yeah, no, there's tourists, people coming back from work, people parking their bicycle, like they just take anyone and send them to jail for a day.
There are a lot of things to say.
It's all about just scaring people.
I heard that it's not only I heard, I know that it's not only cops from Paris or Parisian region, like they make people come from every part of France, maybe people who are not trained, who are not used to Paris, and to the type of demonstration it is, and just thrown newly, I don't know how you say this, newly
unprepared.
They're just thrown straight into it.
Thrown into it, and how can we expect from them to be perfect and just to not panic and to not become violent as well? So it's a thing we have to think of as well.
It's not just that; it's also that they're being justified in advance. So we may mention a little bit more Sainte-Soline, it's a different struggle, but it's happening in France right now. And even before that massive demonstration in Sainte-Soline happened, Darmanin, the rapist interior minister, said, be prepared. We are going to see violent scenes from Sainte-Soline. So even before it happens, you have an interior minister that's saying, be ready, you're going to see videos of cops beating people up.
That reminds me of the criticism.
After 2 people are in the coma.
2 activists in a coma from the cop. And then there's been criticism that, was it Darmanin that said some people came to Sainte-Soline to wage war?
Mm-hmm.
And the response from the left
eco-terrorists
has been the people who wage war are the ones with weapons of war.
No, yeah, of course.
The cops,
and then they deny everything.
Yeah.
That's the thing. They just they admit they're going to war, and then they just said, okay, we did not hit people while riding bikes. Yes, they did. There are videos of it. And it's the constant denying and the constant. If you're authoritarian, at least be honest about it.
Yeah, like I would honestly respect you more if you just told me, but
it's not even just denying; it's straight up lying. So after Sainte-Soline, 2 demonstrators are in a coma. People lost eyes. People have PTSD. I mean, it's really crazy what happened there. And the police released a statement saying that they have 2 or 3 cops. I don't remember. I think it was 2 cops in critical condition between life and death. Those 2 cops came out of the hospital the following day. Go and explain to me how you're in a critical condition one day and the following day you're out of the hospital. It's just straight up lying.
They probably stubbed their toe.
Yeah. It's a miracle.
Yeah, it's a miracle. It's an Easter miracle.
If we say we have 2 demonstrators that got hurt, they say, well, we do as well. Yeah. But it's a lie.
Yeah.
If you would like to support The Final Straw, you can subscribe to our podcast via various platforms, follow and share our materials online, as well as give us feedback via the links at tfsr.wtf/tree, as in Linktree. To support our transcription work and wider project, you can subscribe to us via patreon.com/tfsr. You can also buy some merch or find donation methods at tfsr.wtf/support.
retraite à 60 ans. On s'est battu pour la gagner, on se battra pour la garder. La retraite à 60 ans. On s'est battu pour la gagner, on se battra pour la garder. La retraite. La retraite. La retraite. Libérez nos camarades, ouvrez la cage aux soixantenaires. Qu'ils fassent des promenades, du jardinage et du bricolage, des mots croisés et puis du sport et aussi du soutien scolaire. Qu'ils prennent l'apéro entre amis, qu'ils en dégueulent à la minuit. La retraite à 60 ans. On s'est battu pour la gagner, on se battra pour la garder. La retraite à 60 ans. On s'est battu pour la gagner, on se battra pour la garder. La retraite. La retraite. La retraite. On veut copier toutes les machines, s'envoient en l'air dans l'aiguille. Qu'elles parlent fort, attaquent, nous mettent minables au crâne. Et qu'elles repassent des diplômes, qu'elles nous fassent des tartes aux pommes. Ou qu'elles glandouillent le soleil, si elles ont un peu la flemme. On s'arrêtera pas là, on veut entendre les cris de joie. Dans les parcs on était des cocas libérés. Les cheveux gris au vin, courant à droite vers le levant. Qu'ils puissent chanter et faire des rondes et réfléchir au nouveau monde. La retraite à 60 ans. On s'est battu pour la gagner, on se battra pour la garder. La retraite à 60 ans. On s'est battu pour la gagner, on se battra pour la garder. La retraite à 60 ans. On s'est battu pour la gagner, on se battra pour la garder. La retraite à 60 ans. On s'est battu pour la gagner, on se battra pour la garder.
The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
KiteLine is a weekly 30-minute radio program focusing on issues in the prison system. You'll hear news along with stories from prisoners and former prisoners as well as their loved ones. You'll learn what prison is, how it functions, and how it impacts all of us.
Behind the prison walls, a message is called a kite. Whispered words, a note passed hand to hand, a request submitted to the guards for medical care. Illicit or not, sending a kite means trusting that other people will bear it farther along until it reaches its destination. Here on KiteLine, we hope to share these words across the prison walls.
You can hear us on the Channel Zero network and find out more at kitelineradio.noblogs.org.
Well, since it's been brought up a couple of times, people will be aware of the struggle against Cop City in the United States, with like massive police repression in the streets as well as in the fields there. And there's a long history of people, like large groups of people in France, like defending ecologically sensitive areas such as like the Zone de Défendre and, well, actually a number of those spots around the country. But I wonder if someone could tell listeners a little bit about Sainte-Soline and the demonstrations that happened there. This was like the second similar demonstration, but with a much harder impact from the police this time, right?
Yes. I can talk a bit about Sainte-Soline if you want, but I'm talking a lot because I'm a chatty catty.
A chatty catty and a good girl. Good girl. Excellent.
These are going in your bio on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just a little bit about the environmental context in France, climate change, yada yada. Because of climate change, we have an issue with drought every summer, and it's becoming worse and worse every summer. And so it's threatening agriculture. And so they found this thing that they call méga bassines, which is artificial reservoirs, so big holes massive, we're talking like kilometers long, and I don't like the idea of reservoir because it makes it seem like it's just collecting rainwater, but it's not just collecting rainwater. It's also absorbing water from
The ground.
From the water
ground.
table around.
Yeah.
Like it screws
Suck it
up.
up.
It's sucking up all of the water that's in the soil around, as well as collecting rainwater, and that they're giving it to agriculture, and they're really making you feel like, oh, it's just those mom and pops, like they're just those people working the land. No, it's just really, really big companies.
Yeah, it's pushed by some big
It's-
companies that want
yes,
to be intensive of
Yes.
agriculture.
It's intensive agriculture. It's crops that are just not sustainable. It's a whole system that needs to be changed, but instead of changing it, we're just saying we're going to create those massive reservoirs, depriving everybody else around from water and giving it to this small group of big companies. And so there is one being built right now in this place called Sainte-Soline. And so there has been a lot of demonstrations. There's been some movement around it. And last week, no, was it 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago? maybe?
Sainte-Soline?
2 weeks.
The latest one was 2 weeks ago.
About 2 weeks ago, yeah.
And it was really advertised, we heard about it a lot. So a lot of people showed up. The organizers say about 30,000 people. The cops say 5,000 people, 6,000 people.
It's
So-
a big difference.
Yeah, so I don't know, somewhere in between, but nevertheless, a lot of people showed up. People with kids showed up. Older people showed up. Old school environmentalists showed up. And then some people that were ready to fight with the cops. And the response was just immediate violence from the police. And that is coming from people I know who have been to every violent demonstration there is in the past 10 years, and they've told me I have never seen such a scene of violence. This is the most violent thing I've ever seen. Those are people that went to Wa Travail, that went to Gilets Jaunes, and they say this is just absolutely crazy. They say, the cops themselves say there's been about 5,000 stingers thrown, and there were 6,000 people there.
And
So
there's
it's
the
like,
video
oh,
where
so
they-
you've thrown one
Per
per
person?
person that's there.
That's overkill, dude.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's crazy.
And there's
It's
the video where
insane.
there's some cops throwing the grenades, and one of them goes like, "Woohoo!" after
Yeah,
he throws
yeah.
it. That's the level of I guess professional and training.
It's
and-
not professional
Yeah,
at all.
I know.
And I mean, the absurdity of it, they protecting a hole in the ground. Like,
They-
just that. Like they put people in a coma because they wanted to protect a hole in the ground.
Yes.
Like,
And at this point, they have spent more money defending the hole than building the hole. It's completely absurd.
and if I may do the comparison with ecologist militants in Germany, like they've been
From Lutzerat.
they've been exposed to police repression as well, but it was not as violent. And the reason for it was that, of course, it was not the obvious reason, but the government said it was to protect the protesters, actually, because they do not fall in the holes and fall in the, like they found a way to make it sound reasonable, but it was certainly not as violent. But here in France, like, we have a minister who says we are going to fight them. It's not even amazing words. It's just
It's not even.
we're gonna crush them down. And I was like, who are you gonna crush down?
Yeah, I see more and more this language of like, we must like quell this rebellion sort of like feeling. This like with this, the police are standing between like complete like chaos from the mob,
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of that rhetoric in the US in the past years as well.
Yeah, I think it's, as you're saying, it's a rhetorical move. So if you say we're gonna crush them down, when you hear that, even unconsciously, you kind of believe that there's something that needs to be crushed down.
Totally.
And some, sicko that is trying to put up an irrational resistance with violent means. And I think this goes hand in hand with another thing that I've been hearing in the news, and even from French people that you meet at school, or friends that you meet at the bar or whatever. And sometimes when you of course the whole reform de retraite and the other protests are, talked about on a daily basis. And you hear people say, well, but, the cops must be stressed and tired. So there's also like this gesture towards an understanding towards the cops that completely erases any form of understanding towards the protesters. Like, since the beginning, you were saying, for example, you were talking of the nurses that, had to end their years of work in sick leave, and the violence, that's violence that is extended over years, but that is not acknowledged. That's, someone who's irrational and who needs to be crushed down if they protest.
Also,
but the cops
it's mostly
are
women.
stressed.
The poor guys.
Also, nurses are women, cops are men. I mean,
Yeah, totally.
I'm sorry, but that's...
No, in general,
that's the truth,
in general, it's,
But it's a...
There's
I
the
do-
sympathy
I do-
towards cops that isn't given to nurses and teachers.
I do want to point out that I think the cops are being worn down by the protests, which is a
Absolutely.
good thing, and they should be worried and they should be stressed. That shouldn't evoke empathy for them because they shouldn't have their jobs and they shouldn't be out there facing off against the protesters for this cause in particular. But I think it's important that, maybe they are tired and, not that they would make great decisions if they weren't, but, I think it's important maybe just to remind ourselves as a movement globally that, we're having some effect. We're wearing them down, which is good. It shouldn't evoke empathy for them. I wanted to say, Sainte-Soline, just, again, for people listening in the States, which I guess is most people, I've been fascinated to see that there's actual coverage of this, the front page, coverage of the folks that were injured by the cops, put into coma by the cops at Sainte-Soline in France. And in the States, we had a protester killed by cops at Cop City pretty recently. And you had to dig for that news. You had to go on It's Going Down or something to find that news, or Twitter or something. But if you just fire up your regular mainstream news feed, you're not going to see anything about cops killed at a protest against Cop City in Atlanta, or even about Cop City. Whereas here, it's refreshing. I mean, I think maybe this is me just being an American, being over here and being kind of starry-eyed about the fact that in France, people tend to care more about things like human life versus property. But it's cool at the very least that there is talk. I've seen a lot of headlines are the police out of control? They put 2 people in a coma to defend a hole in the ground, as you said. And that's just not a criticism that I would see in a mainstream news source in the US.
Yeah, but in the same time, from the mainstream French mainstream news, you have a way of covering the demonstrations and covering the movement that is so confusing, because they just show. Of course, they will show people lighting shops on fire and throwing things at the cops, but they're not showing on the national news the cops beating grandpas down, beating just people holding signs on the ground. They just, if we want to see material, we have to go to left-wing press or even on the social networks.
Social media.
Unofficial videos just going on Twitter and Instagram, and just it should be covered equally. If you want to give a neutral view of it, or at least a global view, just show everything, but they don't.
And I think it really is participating in this idea that Macron is really disconnected. When I was saying, many French people are asking, why does he even want to pass this law? And the response is because he's completely disconnected. And then you see the press showing the exact opposite than what social media is showing. So you have the population that's getting their news on social media, and it's completely different news than what they're seeing on the press. And, Macron being a banker, then there's all those ideas of the press and Macron, the bankers, they're all together and we are the people. And I don't know, it's kind of fueling those kind of
I think so. I think that's
narratives,
So I'd kind of like to ask a question in relation to this general trajectory. So if you've got media representing, the police are being tired down, the poor police, these are representatives of the working class in France, and you've got this disconnected banker who, if only he wasn't there, or maybe he's personally manipulated or evil but if we just replaced him, then someone else would make a better decision, as opposed to the idea that there's this wider plan that you're seeing impacted in these different countries towards austerity. And simultaneously, I saw some articles, sorry, this is kind of jumping a little bit, but there's like an asylum and immigration law that's coming up that I know people are working up to try to address publicly. It feels like the public presentation of there being out of control protesters, and then at the same time, the idea that there's a drain on the social resources of the country and our ability to pay for retirement for people that have been working, for French people who have been fighting and working for all this time for retirement, gives an awesome opportunity for the far right and, Marine Le Pen, and I forget the name of the other asshole who was running for president. But these ideas around like the great replacement have been like a pretty common thing, and that fits really into the idea of the idea that like people are coming in from outside, or there are undeserving internal elements that are making it so that this natural balance in the nation, when we could retire at a certain age, is not available. I wonder if you could just sort of like bounce off of that a little bit and see where that takes you.
Yeah, I'm going to pass that, but I just want to make the connection for folks listening that the anti-immigration law is the Darmanin law. It's the Darmanin law. It's the rapist interior minister that we've been talking about. So he's an architect. Yeah, he keeps coming into this conversation. But he's behind this law, I believe. He's kind of the architect of this law. So okay.
It's horrible.
But let's talk about the Darmanin anti-immigration.
I don't know enough to talk about it.
Yeah, I wish I did.
I mean, basically, it's just this law. The project is just to make it more difficult for people to enter the country and become French, and just
is it supposed to make it more difficult to claim asylum?
Yeah,
exactly. So you have a reasonable fear for my life.
And I'm a volunteer at an organization who fights against AIDS, and so part of the work we're doing is taking care of people who are coming through immigration and having to receive medical help to treat them regarding AIDS and hepatitis and everything. So I'm like, it's already very, very difficult because of the administrative process, procedures and everything. And it's social services have basically no means. They have no money, have no workers. It's dreadful for everyone. It's already very, very difficult, and they want to worsen that. Like, I just don't get it. And if I were to make a connection with the pension reform, one of the arguments they said was there are going to be too many retirees for
the system to support.
Not enough workers. But if you let people come in the country and work and contribute to the system,
then we will have enough workers.
It rebalances the whole thing. But I mean, what's
I think
the
the Darmanin law is pretty racially charged. That's what I was going to say. It's like it's clearly about like not letting too many Black and brown people into France. Right, but like you're saying, Muslim. You don't have enough workers, especially North African Muslim, which is also an interesting dynamic. Because like France, I mean, do a little soul searching. You colonized a whole lot of North African countries for a very long time. I think you inadvertently have a link here, like whether you like it or not.
With this asylum and immigration law, I'm very worried because I don't know if it's part of it, but I think it's been discussed that we have some. I wouldn't know the equivalent in English, but l'aide médicale d'État.
So care for foreigners?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's what I have. I'm a foreigner.
You have that?
And
I'm a foreigner. I assume I know that.
It's been discussed by the extreme right wing, why do we have immigrants finding healthcare? And if it's not in this law, I think it's just the thing following it.
Right.
And I'm very, very worried just about what it says about us as humans.
For sure. And I honestly, as a foreigner living here, I'd like to live here long term. Giuseppe, I know you're here like shorter term, but like I'd like to live here longer term, and I should care more about the Darmanin and pay closer attention. I feel like it's been eclipsed by a lot of other things. I'm just very busy personally right now. And then when I have been going out to protests, I've been going out to pension reform stuff, but I've seen a lot of stuff about the Darmanin law around, and like, you know, I mean, I'm no fool. I know how the creep works. They start with one thing, and the next they start taking healthcare away from all foreigners living in France. And like I said, I'm a foreigner living in France, and I have healthcare, and I like it. I have used it several times, you know.
I don't think the Darmanin law is gonna...
Not the Darmanin law, but it's part of a creep pushback.
No, I don't think
and
it's
also,
gonna get as many people on the street as
yeah.
reform.
Well,
Yes,
I hope so.
unfortunately. Yeah, it should.
No, I mean, no, you hope it would, but I don't think it will. One thing
Yeah.
I've seen that I thought was really interesting in Marseille, a lot of things are just glued on the street, like on the walls. You see a lot of posters. Yeah. And I saw a lot of demonstrations against the Darmanin law that were in Arabic and in English and in different languages. And I thought that was interesting, but it kind of, like, it's not the big unions that are organizing. It's very much like small grassroots organizations that are organizing around it. But
yeah, that's unfortunate.
I don't think it's going to.
But I've seen organizing against the Darmanin law for a long time now. I mean, that was, I think, already in the works in the last fall, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
I started to see stuff around here. I mean, this is the 20th arrondissement in Paris. Like, you see a lot of pro-immigrant and immigrant solidarity stuff here. There are a lot of like grassroots organizations that have like a little like, you know, HQ where they run different campaigns out of and run different services out of. And I started to see posters going up, I think last fall, against the Darmanin law. I didn't really pay much attention. Now I'm starting to pay more attention. But it is interesting. I know like there are a number of accounts I started to follow on Twitter, French like protest news, you know, coverage accounts, and they started including more Darmanin stuff in their coverage. Mostly pension reform stuff, but I started to see more and more Darmanin stuff after a big protest against the Darmanin law at some point in the past couple of weeks, since things have really heated up with the pension reform law. So it seems to me like at least the awareness is growing, maybe the coverage is blending, you know, and I think that's coming to some sort of inflection point soon. The Darmanin law.
Yeah.
I don't understand the French like legislative process super well. I don't know if that needs to be voted on. I wish I knew. But I think that has an important date coming up, the Darmanin law, and maybe that's increasing the tension as well. So it's definitely out there. You know,
this guy Darmanin is at the intersection of many of our struggles.
If listeners need to take one thing away from this, it's that Darmanin is not a nice guy.
Darmanin is
I think he controls my visa. I shouldn't say that.
I can say it.
Yeah, you're going on.
He's a crap, Now, you know, on March 8th is the big Women's International Day, and so there was big protests, and Darmanin is definitely a lot of chants were being adapted so that we could put Darmanin there. Darmanin is a real piece of work, for sure.
I expect him to run for president next then.
Absolutely, he will.
Would not be surprised, honestly. Yeah.
The only question is he going to run for Macron's party or is he going to run for Le Pen's party? Because it's literally the same policies that he's pushing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think a lot of people have been like, perhaps this is unwarranted, but like a lot of people have been surprised at how far to the right Macron actually is. I mean, maybe it's easy to say I told you so, or like could have seen that coming.
Surprised.
I don't know, but he seems to me, not living here at the time he was first elected, not paying super close attention. He seems to me like a center, maybe slightly left of center, sort of Obama guy with like very progressive rhetoric and very centrist policies. And he's been pretty conservative and even far right on some things.
It's a big fight I've been having with my mom because I was living in the US when Trump was elected, and I saw people around me like really being affected, you know, and myself being affected by some of Trump's policies. So when a few months later I had to either vote or not vote between Macron and Le Pen, I went out and I voted. And I voted for Macron. And I did it last time as well. Like, I know many people will disagree with me on that. And I'm starting to disagree with myself on that. But if you ask me to choose between Le Pen and Macron, I will choose Macron, you know. So I'm having a lot of fights with people about that because, you voted for him. And I'm like, well, I voted I'm on the second round so that I would avoid a fascist.
Yeah.
Yeah, you went to the polls 2 times in a year to mark a thing. What are you doing the rest of your time? If all that you're doing is saying Macron is going to solve the problems and then going home, then there's some stuff to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also like what I tell people is, have you lived 4 years under Trump?
Yeah.
Are you looking at your country after Trump was the president of it? Because I'm looking at the US right now, and I left the US, and the US is also my country. Like, I'm a citizen of the US. And I left because I don't like what Trump has done with the place. So I don't like what Macron is doing right now, but I know, and that is actually something we have not talked about. The National Rassemblement, it's still called the National Front, because that's what they were called when I left.
The Le Pen, basically, family party that was a National Front for years, and they rebranded like far-right organizations tend to do as the National Rally. Rassemblement National in 2019, a couple years ago. Yeah.
But the National Front has been really quiet about the retirement reform. We have not seen them in protests, which is good. I'm not saying they should be there, we haven't really heard them that much about it. They made it clear that they were going to vote against the reform, but that's it. And I think that is one of the reasons that Macron is being unchallenged, is that on one side you have leftist parties, and then on the other side you have Le Pen's party, and they're all at the Assemblée Nationale, but they're not united against Macron.
And what really tremendously worries me is that during all this month of debating and discussing the law, and you're right, the National Front was very, very silent about it. And if some of them opposed the law, they did it in a very, very silent way, subtle way, and the government portrayed, especially the left, extreme left and left wing, as dangerous, as not authorizing the legislative process to happen as it's supposed to happen. And out of all of this, I think the extreme right just looks respectable, looks decent, and I think it is before that we have more and more people voting for the extreme right National Front because they think everyone else have done the time and proved that they were inefficient. So why not voting for the extreme right? And right now, it's going to draw more people in thinking, well, maybe it's decent, it's correct, it's respectable to choose them because they look like I don't know how to finish this.
They weren't burning trash in the street, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, extreme right, small groups of fascist groups in demonstrations, they do that stuff, but the press doesn't portray them. The government doesn't talk about them. When the government decides, okay, this organism or this association, this organization needs to be terminated, it's rarely, it's been the case, but it's rarely for an extreme right organization. So I just think it gives an avenue, a boulevard for people for extreme right politicians to come and say, well, you haven't tried us, so and we know they're gonna use the same methods, even worse, and I'm just worried. Yeah, I'm very, very worried about that.
Yeah, I know it's a bit like out of the range of what we've been talking about, but like, yeah, last year the government was like actively attempting to destroy anti-fascist groups in Lyon, right?
Yeah.
Is that like, well,
actually it's directly relevant to what Garrick was just talking about, because they used a law that was written in the 1930s to give the government the power to order groups to dissolve. Order groups, you're not allowed to exist as an organization anymore. You can't advertise, you can't hold meetings, whatever. And it was designed to combat right-wing organizations. It's almost 100 years old. The law that they used to break up GAL, Groupe Antifa Lyon et Environ. So that's Antifa group, Lyon and surrounding area. And Lyon also has a huge fascist problem. Like, I think there's a lot of back and forth there between far right and far left in the streets and in a lot of other ways. And and the government ordered GAL, the Antifa organization, the largest one in Lyon, to dissolve. And they actually appealed and won, which is great. So they're still around doing good work in Lyon. And actually, the prosecutor in Lyon struck out twice because they were charging 7 activists from GAL with some pretty serious, I think, assault charges for a brawl that broke out at a protest with some Catholic nationalist activists, and they were facing like up to 2 years, and they all got off, which is great. So GAL is going strong, untouchable. But yes, the government used that law that is exactly what Gary was just talking about to order them to dissolve. And to my understanding, there's no impossibility that something like that happens again.
And we were talking about Sainte-Soline, and the government decided to dissolve.
Soulèvement de la Terre. So it's one of the large
eco-friendly,
like green militant organizations. It's called the Soulèvement de la Terre, so that it's like the uprising of the earth is what it's called, and it's one of the large direct action. Well, I guess they're not only direct, but it's like an eco defense group.
It's not one. It's an agglomerate of groups.
Oh, it's like a network, like umbrella. Okay. So the government ordered them to dissolve, and I guess that's playing out in the courts right now? I don't know. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And why?
Good question.
Just why?
Yeah. Also, it's like ordering a group to dissolve in and of itself is kind of, it's questionable at best. People will just reform under a different name, but
I don't want to throw Giuseppe under the bus, but I was worrying about Italy and how was it before the conservatives, extreme right, were elected, and if you remember hearing or seeing the left-wing opposition being silence or being, just
in the build-up to the election of the right-wing party. It was very different from the situation here, because already at the level of, grassroots organizing and protests, France is in a very different place compared to Italy. Earlier we were talking about Italy having just also announced the reform law that cuts pensions in some form, and today I was looking at my Twitter, and the main union guy in Italy said they want to do this law, we're not going to stop the protests. And most people leftists commenting were like, what protests? You've done nothing. So it's very different from here, and it's been different for years. And then at the governmental, at the level of the parliament, we don't really have a left-wing party anymore.
Oh yeah.
So in France you have Mélenchon, which is it's called Communist Party, right? Still.
No, not exactly, but I think not far from it.
Well, if they asked on TV, you would say he's a communist.
No. Socialist, maybe.
Socialist, okay.
But not communist.
Okay, but anyway,
he's far left.
For left, and people know.
I know what you mean.
They
just make the distinction here because they have the Parti Communiste Français, which is this whole institutional
And then the Parti Socialiste, and Mélenchon was part of the Parti Socialiste, but then he left because when they became more liberal, and he wanted to be more far left.
There you go.
So he's somewhere in between.
To be more for left, and he gets votes. In Italy, what we have is the Democratic Party, named Democratic Party, out of the fetish that in Italy we have towards the US, because in the Democratic Party.
Really?
Yeah, in Italy, in the offices of the Democratic Party when Biden was elected, people had pictures of Biden in Canada, we love. It's terrible. But so this is in Italy. That's the most left party that we have that gets votes
that you guys have,
and it's a right wing party.
Oh my God.
They make laws against immigration. They protect the interest of capital rather than the interest of workers.
Yeah, it's like the Democratic Party in the U.S.
Just about to say.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing. So,
No, but here's the problem in France is that, okay, there's Mélenchon and then there's like 6 other parties that are also far left. And so those votes get divided and then they never win. It's like...
Even when they had the nukes, is this nukes, does this still exist?
Yeah.
Nuke, it still exists? Or was it only for the presidential?
I mean, it's not it's official. It's not a party. Like
No,
it's
like
a
it's a coalition.
They formed
Yeah.
at the National Assembly to have more weight in the votes and everything. But sorry,
But I think it's interesting, especially it'll be interesting for American listeners where we have this binary system. It's Republican, Democrat, and then there's not much else.
Nader.
Ralph Nader. This is like when I was a kid, yes.
The Green Party and the Libertarians are basically the only poll.
Yeah. Like everyone that's for the left and center left came together in a push to make Mélenchon prime minister. Is that right?
Yeah.
In legislative elections, not the presidential elections, but the parliamentary elections, which followed, a few months later. And so Macron won the presidential election, and they have both the president and the prime minister in France. There was this huge push to make Mélenchon, who is the guy we were just talking about, who is far left in some important ways, figurehead in mainstream politics in France. There was this push to make him prime minister. That failed, but to do that, because the left is so fractured, they had to create a coalition of all these small parties. And even then, they didn't get all of the parties on the left on board. It was this whole effort to create this label, create this coalition, and so it's mainstream electoral politics for the left here are pretty screwy. Whereas people talk about the Le Penisation of opinion, the Le Penization of opinion, where like Marine Le Pen's talking points, especially about xenophobia, she has been able to, with increasing success, position herself as just French and beyond the dialogue of right and left. And, and that's, right? French people help
Yeah,
I
don't want to go over all the topics we discussed today, but there's also this movement of the government, the neoliberal government, taking elements of language from the extreme right and ideas and just implement them in their own way, but it's just blurring all limits and barriers between right, center, and it just and in the everyday dialogue and everyday conversations, ideas of extreme right just seem normal, just seem trivial. I don't know if that's the attitude.
True.
And it's it's dangerous. It's in the language, the discourse. It's in the ideas. It's in the measures. It's in the policy response we discussed. It's basically everything. So I will leave France right now. I'm leaving France. Okay.
Really?
No. But it's worrying.
It's worrying. Yeah, it's worrying.
Well, so we're seeing similar things being reflected in a lot of countries simultaneously. Like when you were talking about the motorcycle police being like brought back together, I was thinking of the MAT forces in Greece, the motorcycle riot police. Or like, I know that there's been massive labor demonstrations in a number of places around Europe this last year, which is really inspiring. Similar things to the immigration and asylum law sound like they're happening, or at least the repercussions of it with like in the UK right now, with the undermining of people's ability to saying basically Sunak saying, if you've come here in an undocumented way, we're going to kick you out, which is, the same thing that happens in the US too. So it's not like this country is doing it any better, but I think that there's a lot of, to sort of wrap up, I think that there's a lot of inspiration to be taken from the amount of resistance that people have been engaging in France around issues of ecological devastation and around issues of stealing of your energy and the stealing of the last years of your life or later years of your life and the pleasure and joy of life. I wonder if you have any last words of, do you think that the demonstrations can continue? Do you think that they'll be successful, or do you have any things that you're hoping to see come out of this?
I think my final words would be, it's part of our culture. And I'm not an especially like
Guillotine.
kind of person, but demonstrations, that's part of a culture. Not giving a fuck about work and enjoying our life and spending time with people as being more important than working and making money. That is part of a culture. The welfare state, like the retirement system comes from what happened after the Second World War, when the resistance, organized this government that I'm critical of as well, but they are the ones that came up with all of those ideas. And little by little, this neoliberal Macron is coming and just like taking piece by piece, of everything. And this is our way of showing that we're still resisting against that. And that's it. I'm done.
As a French person, I can say if people in the UK or in Germany or in everywhere else in the world just take inspiration from what we are doing, I'm proud. And if you can help people in France and everywhere else to understand that any citizen can be part of the opposition, can be part of expressing something to help the democratic way of living still going on. I'm for it, and even if I think the demonstrations at the moment are not focused on the same things. Like I think in the UK it's about the inflation at a more general level, and if in France it's the pension reform. But in the demonstrations we see signs and we see people advocating for more global things like inflation as well, the environment, the social services. Well, I think. I don't know about not giving a fuck, but I still think.
Well, that's a very general. That can mean a lot of things. Not giving a fuck.
We have to preserve this way of not accepting and not and caring about what the government does, and if it can lead to more actions. I don't know, petitions and. Action in voting and in elections.
In whatever sense, you know, if we can spoke a broader.
I just hope it won't stop to demonstrations and breaking havoc in the streets, but just becoming part of the process. I'm all for it.
I don't have that much to add, as a foreigner as well. But I think what I can say as a foreigner is that. Seeing, for example, the way that the protests have been received in Italy, it's definitely been hugely inspiring for people. And I've heard people that are far from radical and that have never been to demonstrations, being, admiring in awe the way that the French people have gone to the streets and responded to the law. So I think, in a sense, before Burik was talking about the way that, for example, right-wing concepts are being trivialized and made normal and enter the political language. I think in a sense, and this goes also back to what we were saying about the trajectory, if there's a trajectory towards, countries, governments becoming more right-wing and being more authoritative and just making laws with the 49.3 system, we have to find a counter trajectory, which means that any time that something like this happens, it doesn't just happen. People go into the streets and they make it difficult. And sometimes you may win, sometimes you may lose, but it's not something that you can decide or evaluate like that. The law passed in the end, and so, this meant nothing. And of course it meant so much. Mm-hmm. Think of all the young people that were on the streets and what they're going to grow up to be and what they're going to think about their country. And the people abroad that see that this can happen and this can be done. So I think it's huge, and it really then connects to more global issues, because we're going to have to be in the streets a few years from now or tomorrow really about the climate, and stuff like that. And so that this is happening in a country like France that definitely has a lot of media attention is great.
I don't have much to add. I love that the French are willing to throw down for this stuff. I know that there's been a lot of sort of buzz among American lefties, on social media or whatever, about like the French are doing it right, the French are showing us how to do it, whatever. You and I were talking about this, Giuseppe, like you were part of an occupation at your school, and you're like, I see people that I know for a fact did not even stop by the occupation, and they're tweeting like, yeah, the French are doing it the right way. It's like, well, dude, you have to be the French protester you want to see in the world. Like you have to, I don't know. And it's easy to say that, I'm not one to, it's impossible to take up, every cause and put your energy. But, I think that culturally Americans are much like more susceptible to be guilt tripped about like not wanting to work as much, for example. Whereas in France, they're like, fuck are you talking about? Like life is for living. And I think that's a really important aspect of French culture that I appreciate. I do hope to win. I don't know.
You do work too much to be a real French person.
I do work too much to be a real French person. And I'm a freelancer and a student. Like I should, I do it
You're
myself.
not even making money off of it.
I'm not.
Stop.
It's terrible.
We call it the grind in the U.S.
Yeah, it's the grind. I'm on my hustle. Yeah.
Just chill. Like, come
I
on.
need to chill. You're right. Well, I guess we're almost done with this interview. So on that note,
Well, this was actually a long intervention. Cool. Thank you very much for having this conversation, all of you. And now some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain. This is The Final Straw Radio. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at TFSR, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books. Located at 610 Haywood Road in West Asheville, Firestorm Books is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.